Today I'm going to show you how to create this stylized spiderweb texture. It is a little complicated, but I'll try and break it down for you to make it easier. This is what our end node setup is going to look like. So if you're not already used to working with nodes, this will probably be pretty confusing, but let's get started. To set up our scene, let's get rid of that cube and bring in a plane. I'm going to change the entire area to my shader editor and put that material that was on our cube on our plane. Hit N to get rid of that shelf on the right. Let's change the top right to our 3D viewport. Just make it a little larger here and zoom in with the mouse wheel and hold down Z. Move your mouse up, you'll be in rendered mode. For now, let's just get rid of this principled BSDF. I'm going to bring in a texture coordinate node. Just make sure we're coming out of object. That shortcut there, by the way, was Control Shift left click, and it just kind of cycles through these options here. I'm going to bring in a gradient node. Just place it right here, and I'm going to change this option to radial. Creates a gradient going counterclockwise from 0 right here with the black, all the way around to 1 with the right there. And I'm going to bring in a math node. Change this to multiply by hitting M with that open. And I'm going to change this to 12. So now it's 0 all the way to 12. If I bring in a second math node and set this to fraction, it basically divides this up into series of 0 to 1. So since I had 12 here, it makes 12 divisions. Whatever I put here, that's going to be the amount of divisions. So right now I have an uneven gradient. It goes from black to white slowly on this side, but then when it goes black to white here, it's very sharp. I wanted to change that, so I'm going to duplicate this fraction and change it to subtract. And if I set this to 0.5, you can see what it's done here is it's set 0 now in the middle, and this is going to be positive 0.5, and this is actually negative 0.5, but since it's less than 0, it's just shown as black. I'm going to duplicate this again and change this to absolute value. And what that does is it now makes anything that was less than 0 is now positive. Anything that was negative is positive. So now I've got 0 in the middle here, and this is 0.5, and this is 0.5. I'm going to duplicate this one more time, change this back to multiply, and change this value to 2. And now we've got 0 to 1, 0 to 1, and now nice equal gradients. In my opinion, this is a very useful node setup, and is worth committing to memory if you can. And in the past, I have substituted this gradient node for a separate XYZ, a math node set to arctan2, and a map range, like in my jellyfish video, but it is easier just to set it to the gradient texture like this. So I'm just going to move all of this up here, and let's view the object again. This time I'm going to bring in a vector math node. Just place it here, and we'll set this to length. And what this does is it creates a nice circular gradient. I could have also used a gradient node to get this effect, but this is just another way to do it. Next I'm going to do something similar to what I just did, and bring in a math node. Set this to multiply, and then change this to 12. And now instead of just going from 0 to wherever it reached 1, it's going from 0 to 12, so that same distance. So let's go ahead and bring in another math node, and we'll set this one to fraction. We should see the same effect as before. We do. We can control this by adjusting this number on the multiply. We'll just leave it at 12 for now. And I'm going to bring in another math node and set this to subtract, and 0.5, which it already is at, so that's perfect. Let's duplicate this, set this at absolute, and then duplicate this one more time, change it back to multiply. We'll change this value to 2, and now we've got a set of 0 to 1, 0 to 1 gradients there. So we could mix these together at this point here, holding down Control and Shift, and right-clicking and dragging from one to the other. We can create this mix RGB and set this to, not color burn, set it to multiply, just set it to 1. It's not looking too bad, but we want these webs that are circular to kind of go in between these lines here. Move this down a little bit here, and I'm going to duplicate this entire top part with Control Shift D, so it remains attached to the object there. And let's just take a look at these two guys here. Right now they're the same. I want to rotate one, so I'm going to bring in a vector rotate node and just place it on this top noodle here. And if we change this angle down here, we can see that that one rotates. We want it in the middle there. 15 is the right number there, and you actually get that by dividing 360 by 12. That gives you 30. You just divide that by 2, and you get 15. So that's how you offset these two guys. This top string here, this is going to be our actual web, and this one here is going to be used to kind of influence these areas of the web and push in points there. So I'm just going to move this down a little bit here and bring in a mapping node. I'll place it right here and then plug this multiply into the scale. We can see the effect is quite strong here. If we want to control that, one option is to bring in a color ramp. So I'll place it right here. We can kind of play with this a little bit. I'll bring this bottom one up to 0.4, and then I'm going to change this to white. And then this top one, I'm going to bring this down to 0.86, and then I'm going to change this just a little bit gray, about 0.95. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to change this from linear to B-spline. We can see that looks a lot better. Let's try now plugging this one into the bottom area here. Now we can see what this mix looks like. It's looking a lot better already. If we were to add some mix RGBs after this here, we can set this first one to color burn and the second one to color dodge. This first color to black and the second color to white. Let's set this one to something pretty low like 0.05, and this second one we'll set to 1. So this is looking pretty good. I don't really like the look of how thick it is out here versus how thin it is in here, so I'm going to try and offset that. I'm going to grab this top area and just move it up a little bit, and I'm going to grab a length node again. No, a vector math node and set it to length rather. We'll just put it here and run object into that first slot there and set this to length. You can see we get that circular gradient, and I want this to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to duplicate this vector math node, change it to scale. We'll just change this to 0.5. So if we plug this into that one there, we can see we can control the size of this gradient by decreasing it. It just goes further out. So 0.5 is good for now. Then I'm going to plug this into a color ramp. Place that right here. And let's run this into the multiply right here. Just kind of see what happens. Bring this white down to 0.4. Then let's duplicate this color ramp and just put it after here as well. Which noodle am I putting this on? I'll just put it on this bottom one. So it's just on our preview so far. And let's adjust this guy. We'll bring the black up a little bit to 0.0. I can't even see what I've got written down. I think it's 0.01. No, it's not even the black. Let's bring the black down to 0.01, up to 0.01, and the white is going to come down to 0.05. So we've got much more uniform lines this time. Let's try plugging this into that mix here, and let's see what we got. Yeah, looking much better already. A little bit more control now. Next, I'd like to make it so that these web areas don't go all the way to the end. They're kind of more centralized, and there's some blank areas out here with just these long lines going to the edge. So to do that, I'm just going to bring in another vector math node and set this one to length again to create that circular gradient. Then I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it right here, and then a mix RGB. And I'll just place it right here for now. Let's move these just closer to the end right here because we want this multiply to go into color 1 where this guy is, and then put this guy into the factor. If you look at this right here, let's set this one to white as well. But if you look at this color ramp right here, we can kind of control how far out that goes there. We had pretty good results setting the white to 1 and the black to 0.97. I'm still going to do one more thing though. Let's attach on to where we've got this absolute value right here. I'm going to bring in a math node and just place it right here and bring it down here. We're going to change this to multiply, and I'm going to change this to 2.6. I'm going to bring in a mix RGB and place it between this length and color ramp that I just set up. We're going to plug this into the color 1 and this length is going to go into color 2, just like it's doing. And we'll set this at 0.92. And if we look at what it's doing now, we can see we've got this shape to it. You can see that if you adjust this multiply, it changes this shape here as well. But the 2.6 worked pretty well. You can see that if you look at this mix RGB here, it matches up a little bit better to the web. You do have to do some fine tuning depending on what your settings are, but I'm just going to leave it like this. Eventually, I think it'll look okay. Let's plug this mix RGB into this mix RGB we set to multiply earlier. We can see the total output is looking a little bit better now. We've got some things happening at the edge that we're going to clean up eventually, but we won't worry about that just yet. The next thing I want to do is I want to make it kind of a variation for how many of these strands there are. And I also don't want them to match up. You know, I don't want it to be like right here. I'd like the next one to be maybe right here, and then the next one to be in kind of a random area. So to do that, we're going to plug something into this value here, because you can see if I adjust this value here and that multiply, we get a difference in the amount of threads that go that way. So I had this set at 12. We won't really worry about that because we're going to plug something into there anyways. Just going to make a bit of room here by moving all of this down a little bit. And why don't we make a node reroute as well? Just try and make this a little easier to see what's going on. And we're going to bring in a radial texture again, a gradient texture again rather, and set it to radial. So let's plug this into the vector, set this to radial. We can see the same thing again here. Then I'm going to bring in a math node, set this to multiply, and then bring in another math node and set this one to snap. The important part here is we want the relationship to be this multiply should be 12 times this one. So I'll just set this at 12 and this one at 1. It's not very easy to tell at this point, but these top areas here in the upper part of the range are separated just like these bottom areas here. And we can see that if we plug in a white noise texture. This bottom one here gives us a color output, just random colors here. This top one gives us a value. And if we change this to 4D, we've got this W that we can change, and it gives us a different seed each time. Same thing with this color here. If we do the color output, it's pretty cool, you know, it just gives you a different color output each time. I'm going to change this to the value output and change this to 0.4. I just like that seed the best so far. Now that we have this random output, I'm going to plug this value into the value on this multiply right after this length node here. If we see what's happening, you see it's giving us a random assortment here. It's not really in the range we want, so why don't we change that a little bit? First of all, we'll put a color ramp in here, and then we'll bring in a math node and just place it right here. Let's adjust the color ramp first. For the black, let's change this to a 0.55 gray, just by typing 0.55 into the value, or you could use your mouse wheel as well. And we'll just leave the white at 1 there. We'll change this to multiply, and then we can adjust this value here, kind of get a different amount here of webs there. I'm going to change this to 7. I'm going to make this plane a little bit bigger, but I don't want the texture to move at all. I want it to kind of stay in the same spot. So I'm just going to quickly tab into edit mode and then hit S to scale it up. And now I don't have to worry about the texture stretching as well. Something like this looks pretty good. You can see there's something weird going on here. I could fix that with this color ramp right here, or with this kind of setup of nodes, this area right here. But I've got something else I want to do further up the line first. So I'd like to make it look like it's sagging in the middle. Gravity should be acting on this spider web at least a little bit. So I'm going to come out of generated. I'm going to bring in a separate XYZ node. I'm going to plug this into a color ramp. Then I'll bring in a combine XYZ and just place it right here. And let's move all this over just a little bit. Not like that. Like this here. And then I'm going to bring in a mapping node. And just place it right here because I want this to run into the location. Let's look at the end product again here while we adjust our settings. So first of all, I don't want it to affect the X, I want it to affect the Y here. And then what we're going to do is we'll move this white into the middle of the color ramp at 0.5. We'll bring one more point in here, and we'll put it to the right there. And we'll change this one to black as well. So if we look at this mapping node right here, we can see this is what the new coordinate system looks like. And we can adjust it if we put in B-spline to something more like a sagginess there. If we look at the end product now, we can see we've kind of achieved that. The last thing I wanted to do is just bring in some noise. And this is just going to be some pretty low frequency noise. We're going to set this to 2, then bring in a mix RGB, place it right here, and just run object into color 2 as well. And then we'll set this at 0.95. Now we can see just some very slight noise variation in there. Not really that much to be noticeable, but just a little bit. Let's go back to this color ramp for a second here as well, because this white in the middle, we can change this, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. Zoom out a little bit here, pardon me. We can change this to more of a gray color and get less of a sag if that's what you're going for here. Originally, I had it at 0.65. I like the look of this here, but if you want it to really hang low, white is going to be a better option. Look at a few changes you can make. If you wanted this to be a bigger texture, you could change this to 22.5 for the angle here. Set this multiply at 8. And same with this multiply down here. Set this one at 8 as well. And then finally, this one at 8 as well. So now we've got kind of a larger texture, bigger spiderweb there. If you wanted a much smaller texture, you could come over here, set this to 7.5, which was half of our original one there. Set this at, 24. Set this one down here at 24, and this one here at 24. In fact, it makes sense to just kind of sync those up with a value node. We can see this is a little bit more exaggerated right here, so I'm going to adjust that slightly. That's this one right here, the one we set to B-spline. I'm going to set this at 0.98 instead of 0.95. It's a little bit less, curvy, a little bit more realistic here. We can see that something's happening right here. I'm going to adjust my color ramp right here, which we used for the mask, just see if I can get something that looks a bit better. Maybe take that one off. Sometimes it's hard to get. You know what I'm going to do is actually just make a mix so we can kind of see what's going on here. So we want to see this final output here, but we also want to see this mask. So bring in a mix RGB, I'll place it right here, and we'll plug this into the top here. And if we're looking at this, we can see what they both look like synced up. So why don't I make this less exaggerated right here? And then we'll probably be much easier to mask stuff out. That looks good there. I'm happy with that. If you wanted to change the seed as well, make sure you come over to this white noise texture and experiment with this. You'll probably get some pretty cool results just by clicking through here. Now that we've got this black and white image here too, let's use it as a mix shader factor between a printable BSDF and a transparency node. So let's just set that up. Actually, we won't plug that in just yet. Let's move this over, put this here. We'll bring in a transparent BSDF as well. Then let's Control Shift, right click and drag from one of these to the other, and it'll create this mix shader for us. And we're going to plug this color dodge into the input of that factor there. Let's see what's going on here. It's not really working just yet because we have to do one more setting here in Eevee, and that is just down here in the material settings blend mode. We're going to change this to alpha clip, and then shadow mode, we'll change this to alpha clip as well. Let's create a second plane now, and let's just size it up and move it down. And we can now see this top one is above that first one there. So there we go. We got our spiderweb texture and some transparency as well. Might make more sense if we grab both of these and just kind of rotate them 90 degrees on the x-axis there. But I guess then I have to bring the light over. Yeah, there we go. Pretty cool. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed that and you were able to follow along easily enough. If you have any questions, feel free and ask me in the comments or on my Discord channel. I'll try and clear up any confusion. Thanks for watching.